You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Enterprise episode, Minefield. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Jason Tyler. Hey, Father.
Hello.
Folks, be sure to follow The Secrets of Star Trek in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should hit the bell to get notifications. I should also mention, and because folks don't know, you can also watch our video on Spotify. They actually allow us to put the video up there as well. So if you're a Spotify user, you can watch the show. So we are discussing this second season Enterprise episode, Minefield. And so, Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this one?
This week, Archer and the gang rock up to an uninhabited rock when the Enterprise is struck by a mine. Turns out it's part of a big minefield, and there's another mine stuck to the Enterprise. Malcolm goes outside to defuse it, but he activates one of its robotic legs that spears him through the leg and pins him to the ship. There is a plan to remove the mine by detaching the hull plate in, but they don't use that plan because this episode is one big demonstration of how a good guy Captain Archer will never leave one of his crewmen behind. So Archer goes outside to help defuse the mine. Plot complications ensue, including some previously unknown Romulan ships showing up because their empire has claimed the uninhabited planet. The Enterprise then leaves the minefield on a slow walk out of the solar system. In the end, Archer orders the hull plate in detached. He then cuts the leg of the mine that's pinning Malcolm to the plate they're on. The two shield themselves from the resultant explosion, and they're recovered. The end.
Father, what'd you think of this one?
Overall, a good episode. I like this type of ship problem, especially, where they have to go out on the hull to do something, a little EVA action there, not just standing around the consoles and describing, what needs to be done that way. But we see kind of the what feels like more like real life early space flight, would look like, and some troubles that would come in there.
I know the NASA astronauts just had huge problems with mines getting stuck to their ships. Yeah.
Well,
the space shuttle minefields. Yeah.
Well, I should clarify. Early space flight, when we imagine there are hostile alien species out there, right?
Yeah.
Rather than some of what we'd see in the later series. But the Romulans are certainly in character, in the sense of being very secretive. We don't see them, which is good because obviously the original series had the big reveal of the Romulans being related to the Vulcans. Maybe a continuity issue, though, with the cloaking device, because that was also supposed to be kind of a new thing, I believe, in Balance of Terror. But
I always
overall,
assume that cloaking devices are an arms race, so if we see one early, it's just an earlier version.
Right, yeah. So, but yeah, it's one I've enjoyed. So,
how about you, Jimmy? What'd you think of this one?
Oh, I thought it was a thoroughly non-offensive episode. It's really, to me, it's really paint by numbers, and it's not offensive in any way. I mean, artistically, it's not morally offensive either, but it's not really interesting to me either. It's kind of there.
Yeah. We do have the moral principle of double effect involved, but yeah, they seem to apply it pretty well.
Yeah, and they don't explore it.
No,
there's no discussion of it.
Right.
I do like, though, like Father Tyler said, I do like the physicality of this. So I like the idea of, from a certain point of view, I like the idea of going out to try to defuse this mine, but it's all paint by numbers from there, and they're ignoring the plausibility of, can you really diffuse an alien technology designed by someone with a different brain? And then it's all, you see those Y-shaped things, Captain, that don't look like Y-shaped things when you see them on screen. and all you need to do is pull them out and put them back in over and over again in a certain sequence just to build dramatic tension. It's really paint by numbers.
That was the believability on the diffusing of the mine was hard because how would you possibly, there are a billion ways you could create a mine. The idea that you would be able to figure out the diffusing sequence of how to diffuse all the different.
Well, I want to give them some slack because Malcolm is scanning the thing. I mean, he's got a tricorder there, so or something like a tricorder. So he's getting the internal diagram of this thing. Yeah. So okay, but yeah.
For me, this is a character episode as opposed to a plot episode. Like there's a plot, there's a story, but it's really at the service of exploring the character of Malcolm Reed. And I think Malcolm's an interesting figure, and I like learning more about him. I think as the series goes on, we're going to learn some surprising things about him. The Section 31 thing that eventually comes up, but it is interesting to learn, that he's more of a military man. He comes from a military family, sort of that British tradition of the British, the Royal Navy man, as from father to son to grandfather, that whole thing. So I think that's interesting about Malcolm.
Yeah, I like the fact that even though he comes from this long line of Royal Navy men, that he didn't go into the Royal Navy because he's afraid of drowning.
Yes.
And so you go into space instead? Really? Interesting psychological quirk, because space will kill you faster than the ocean will.
Right. Phobias are not always logical, I guess, right? So I like that, but as you both say, the plot is kind of at the service of that, and so I didn't feel like a lot happened. I mean, there was plenty going on, but I didn't feel like I think, as you said, Jimmy, it was paint by numbers. It's, you go out in the hull, the enemy's going to show up, they're going to tell you to go, something's going to happen to prevent you from going right away, and then the whole tension over the timing and how patient will the enemy be. Will they be just patient enough for you to defuse the bomb and, get inside?
And there's other obvious plot complications, like Hoshi gets injured in the initial mine explosions, which miraculously no one gets sucked out into space over.
I made the same note, given the amount of damage that gets caused, like a giant chunk gets taken out of the ship.
Yeah. But Hoshi gets injured so that she's not on the bridge, so that they have to go through extra hoops, and then they say the translator won't work, and they have to get Hoshi the logs of the communication down in sickbay. This is all just to give Hoshi something to do.
Yeah.
So she can get a paycheck this week. and it's also not plausible, because they've already told us in Next Gen that the Romulan language is related to the Vulcan language. So the translator should absolutely be able to crack it.
Right.
Yeah.
It would have been better if they just had the translator working and never made an issue of it.
Yeah.
Right. That would have been a little more plausible. I mean, they're working under a difficulty, which is we've established already in TOS that no one knows what the Romulans look like. And so this is the introduction of the Romulans into Enterprise. So this has to happen. And I think it's been established that had Enterprise continued on, we would have got to the Romulan War,
which they should have done from the beginning. That's what they should have had, one pre-war season max. And then gone straight into the Romulan War. The same way Babylon 5 did.
Right. And DS9, they had a couple of seasons before you got
they had like 4.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have a plan.
Right. But they definitely should have gone, instead of the time thing and the temporal Cold War, and then they had the Zinti crisis and all that other stuff. They should have just, like you said, went right into the Romulan, because that's what everyone wanted. It's what everyone expected. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Instead, let's go gee whizzing around the galaxy, seeing stuff for the first time.
One thing I liked about Enterprise, though, was each episode, like, there were consequences that carried over. Like in the next episode, they're going to be dealing with the damage to the ship. It's not just like, oh, look, next week we've miraculously fixed this giant chunk that we lost out of our ship, which TNG sometimes did. So it'll be that's a nice thing about them, is at least they kind of had this idea. So I liked also the opening, where Malcolm's been invited to the captain's table for breakfast. Clearly Archer has this, let's get to know the senior staff's breakfast plan. He's come up with this idea of having a meal with each of his senior staff.
Dreaded by all underlings.
Yes. And Malcolm clearly doesn't know how to socialize with is
With Archer,
superior
anyway.
with
Yeah.
Archer, right? And he's like, at first he thinks he's there because he's been done something wrong. Then he's there because he thinks we have to start discussing work stuff. And Archer's like, no work. Let's talk about you. What are your hobbies? What sports do you like? I did like the fact that he later on will say, I still haven't picked up any interest in sports since breakfast. That was a nice little reference. But he kind of calls out Archer. He says, honestly, I think you're too loosey-goosey with the crew. I think you're too friendly, and it harms discipline if the captain fraternizes and socializes with the crew a little too closely. And that kind of goes to, I think, things we've talked about, which is Starfleet, Starfleet, I think it's not military, but it has military structure. So, they should pick one.
They got rank and structure and weapons. They're military.
Yeah. But they run around pretending that they're not. I mean, even the Coast Guard, they have ranks, rules against fraternization and stuff like that. That's still military. So I thought that was interesting. So they go blundering into this cloaked minefield, what's the point of a cloaked minefield?
Well, okay, so I thought about that, but mines are by definition cloaked here on Earth. I mean, they're buried or they're floating underwater. Mm-hmm. The part of the point is you're not supposed to see where the mines are. So in space, where you can see everything, because there's not dirt or water blocking your view of them, cloaking devices for mines would make sense. But you need to declare this your territory. You otherwise you're just killing people for no reason. If you mine somebody's harbor which is an act of war, you've at least notified people you're doing it, or notified people you're in hostilities ahead of time. If you've got a secret facility and you put a minefield around it, you put warning signs and a fence around the minefield.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You don't just mine somebody's space. You don't just mine space and not tell people, stay out.
And they get mad when people blunder into it. Like, you've cloaked the mines. I don't know where they are. What do you expect me to do? Now,
with the Romulans in Earth not having any contact yet, is it possible that the Romulans have claimed this planet and they've notified the other civilizations they have been in contact with, and they just didn't notify Earth because they haven't had contact?
It's possible they didn't, but they didn't tell us that. The sensible thing to do would be to put a marker buoy in space in this solar system announcing this is Romulan territory, stay out.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's apparently enough civilizations, blundering around space, checking out all the M-class planets where this would probably be a regular problem. And I was thinking about that, like even on Earth, we mentioned we have minefields both in the water and on land. Sometimes they are marked because it's like, you don't go through here. We have mined this so that you don't go through this place. Like if you have this planet and you put a minefield around it because you don't want people to go there, well, then you need to tell people you can't go there. It doesn't make sense unless you give a warning. So a bit of a small flaw in the writing of it, I guess. But
another is, why does that mine that doesn't immediately detonate, why does it decloak? It's sitting right there and we can all see it. And the non-diegetic reason is the audience wants to see it. But I can cut them some slack on that since it was malfunctioning anyway.
Right. It broken. Archer gets a pretty good line. I've never heard of a minefield with just two mines. So clearly, there must be more out there. And then they come up with this tool that they've used before that they have to adjust, which I like that. It's not just magic decloaker device. And that goes to what you said earlier, Jimmy, about, apparently the cloak now is not the same cloak we will have later because, this trick doesn't work later on in TOS or TNG. So,
and I like how it's fortunate how even in the original series, they talk about this, because in the Enterprise incident where Kirk goes to steal the cloaking device from the Lady Romulan captain, there's a line in that episode about how there's an arms race that will always result in, okay, you stole our cloaking device, but we're going to get a better one. And then you'll find a way to crack that, and then we'll get a better one. And so,
right.
Yeah.
Presumably by the time of TNG and DS9, the cloak is much improved.
They could just look through anything from the previous century, let's say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like, wasn't it the case when they first had the cloaking device on TOS that sometimes they could use sensors to pick up where the cloaked ship was? They just couldn't see it at first. And then by TNG, not only can you not see it, but sensors can't detect it either unless you do some special stuff or whatever to the sensors.
Yeah, right. There's also that line from Uhura in the movies, the thing's got to have a tailpipe.
Yeah, that's right.
right. They were looking for emissions or distortions and that sort of thing. Right, exactly. So Reed is insistent on sacrificing himself for the ship. Like, I think he keeps telling Archer, you got to leave me behind. You got to, set me loose. And because we've created this impossible situation where we can detach the hull plate and set it free. And I like that. It's not just simply like we have to unscrew some bolts, that there's stuff that has to be done in the engineering of the ship in order to release this. And so, but now,
so why don't you do it and let it float a safe distance from the ship and then detach Malcolm, which is what they do, just really fast.
Right. Someone figures that out later on. Right. So and then there's this whole bit where the Romulans like, well, just sacrifice your crewmate and leave. We don't care. And they are truly alien. They don't have the same values. Clearly, the value of life, of an individual life that we have, or at least of alien individual life that we have. So it does convey that the Romulans are different than we are and have a different, they're a little bit more ruthless than we are, and so they like sacrifice them.
So is Malcolm, because after all that, Malcolm he tries to commit suicide. He detaches his own air hose and bleeds off all of his air to try to force Archer to detach the hull plate in. And Archer then detaches his own air hose and replenishes Malcolm's supply. But dude, Malcolm just tried to commit suicide.
Yeah. That was I think it was a kind of a big deal to show that, on screen like that. He needs a little counseling, I think, afterward. So they can't beam him out, clearly. I mean, again, I think they've established in Enterprise they don't like to beam things around, and they can't be, in TNG or DS9, maybe they're sophisticated enough where they could beam him out and leave the leg behind or something.
Yeah, I see. That's another solution. I mean, if I were writing this, I would say, well, we can't beam him. We could beam him out, and this situation is serious enough it could warrant that. But part of the leg would come with stuck in his leg, and you'd have to detach it and do surgery at that point, which is what they have to do anyway, because Archer cuts the leg.
Yeah,
but that's going to cause the mine to explode.
Yeah.
So again, you just do what they did in emergency circumstances deliberately. You detach the hull plate and let it float away. Beam Malcolm out of there, assuming his consent. And let the mine explode.
Right. The plausibility of the shuttle pod doors bearing the brunt. I mean, I get the fact that
the Enterprise hull didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah. So the hull was unyielding. It had so I get that. The force behind it. You have the entire mass of the ship as a reaction to the action. Mass. Yeah. Whereas with the shuttle pod doors, you're in space, so there's no, it's all action. It's all pushing you away. So therefore, it's just momentum, I guess, is inertia. I'm sorry,
all the shuttle pod doors needed to really do was prevent them from getting any rips in their spacesuits or direct body impact.
Yeah. But still, good.
as they're getting away from the mine, they're kind of spinning a bit, and then all of a sudden they just happen to be lined up the right way with the shuttle pod door between them and the explosion. Like, they didn't have any thrusters on their spacesuits, did they? Right. So how did they keep themselves aligned the right way so that they're not, if they're turned to the side or have their back to the explosion, all of a sudden those shuttle pod doors don't help them at all at that point.
Yeah,
true. By the way, speaking of spacesuit features, Malcolm needs to learn his better, because even today in the 20th and even back in the 20th century, they had bathroom facilities in spacesuits.
They did.
And so Malcolm should not be embarrassed about having to go to the bathroom in his spacesuit. They do that now.
Yep. The 7-8 hour spacewalks on the space station, they're not popping back in for a potty break. Yeah, that's, or even just on planes, like a long haul, fighter jets or bomber pilots with very long flights. They have facilities for that.
Yeah.
So I liked Malcolm's story. Like, you're always going to get a story. He's got the story of his great uncle on the submarine HMS Clement. I like the idea that on Earth at the time, they still have national militaries, national navies, and armies and that sort of thing.
They're just the Park Service, though. I mean, Earth hadn't had an internal war in who knows how long.
Right, I guess, perhaps. But there's still a navy, so maybe they're like the Coast Guard, helping with navigation stuff. Although, I'm not sure you'd need a submarine for that. But in any case, his great uncle on the submarine, who also had aquaphobia, but then sacrificed himself. And I think, Malcolm's living out this idea that, I need to, if I'm truly going to live up to the family name, I need to die in this ironic way, sacrificing myself for the ship, or something like that. I mean, again, I think, Jimmy, as you said, it's sort of paint by numbers. It's exactly how you would write such an episode. There's not much variance from it.
And I find it a little, it's an okay episode, but I just find it a little annoying that we've got good guy Captain Archer, and this whole thing is just a demonstration of he's not leaving a man behind. And I've seen that trope so many times. It's not that there's anything wrong with the trope. It's just, I've seen it so many ways. And if you're going to do it, at least do an interesting presentation of it, as opposed to a paint by numbers presentation of it.
Right.
At least we didn't have T'Pol saying the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one.
Right. She didn't advocate for leaving him behind, because that's the logical thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be, it's another cliche we'd get too often. Yeah, I do kind of wish there was a twist. There was something different that they, and this is the nature, I guess, of 20 episode, 26 episode, shows like this back in the day. Is you occasionally get a paint by numbers episode that isn't groundbreaking or new. It's just,
at least it's not actively bad.
Yes,
right.
Yes. that is feet praise.
and we got an Oliver Twist reference in it. Please, sir, may I have some more?
Yes, with reference to drugs, which is nice. Yeah. The painkiller. Anything else that came up with
I
it?
just kept wanting to work in a Rock Lobster reference with Malcolm. At Motion in the Ocean, his air hose broke.
Any other notes on this one, Father?
None from my end.
How about you, Jimmy? Anything else?
Nope. And I think the brevity of this episode of Secrets of Star Trek is a testimony to the quality of this episode of Enterprise.
When they're actively bad, there's plenty to talk about. When they're really good, there's plenty to talk about. But when they're just kind of, there's not a whole lot to say. We've said it all.
I took fewer notes on this than maybe any episode I've done with you guys so far.
I know. I get so sick as we sit down to record, I'm looking at my notes going, oh man, how am I going to spread this out a bit? So we're like, well, thanks folks. Thanks for coming. That's the summary of the episode, and that's the episode. Okay, so we'll bring things to a close then. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including this time Father John E., Priscilla H., Darius M., Jason M., and Paul G. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So, what did you think of this Enterprise episode, Minefield? Did we miss something? Was there something really good we should have mentioned? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or you can comment on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. I'm going to guess that our discussion next week will be much longer, because next time we'll be discussing The City on the Edge of Forever from TOS, which is considered one of the best of all the Star Trek episodes. So looking forward to that. And until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thanks, Dom, and live long and prosper.
Excuse me. And Father Jason Tyler, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, I'm not going to argue with you, Malcolm. It was 20. That's an order.